to be honest with you, they were pretty faithless prayers. I didn't think that they were going to do any good, but I didn't know what else to do. And gosh, this is hard to do this in front of this. Hey everybody, Brock Heasley, the writer and director of The Shift here, and I'm out here on the outskirts of Fresno, California, the city where we shot The Shift, surrounded by smoke. I don't know if you can tell, but there's no sky, that's just all smoke. There's fire in the foothills. All of California is on fire right now. My car is right there. It's covered in ash when I got into it this morning. And why am I out here? Why am I out here in front of this empty dirt field with all this traffic raging behind me? I'm out here because I want to talk about darkness. I want to talk about why The Shift is the way that it is. I've been blessed, and I say blessed specifically, to have dark times in my life. And those dark times have given me perspective on God and perspective on life. And it has helped me to see His love and to see His light shine. My father was packing up for the night 3 days before my 12th birthday. This was years ago. Two men burst in with semi-automatic submachine guns and immediately began firing. The first bullets went right towards him, hit him in the stomach, and he fell to the ground. The next bullets went into the cases, the display cases where all the guns were kept. And as soon as the glass broke, they began quickly gathering the guns into a bag. And then they kept shooting my father as he was lying there on the ground. They didn't want any witnesses. And they made sure of that, shooting him over and over and over again, up and down his body. And then they left. And as you can see where I am right now, there's not a whole lot here. A couple of farmhouses, a highway road that's a lot more active than it was back then. And he was alone, and there was nobody coming. He was shot 13 times. I honestly don't know anybody else who's ever been shot that many times. But he was shot that many times, and he was on the ground, and he had a decision to make about what he was going to do, and whether or not he was going to get up and call 911 or give in to the pain and die. To my father's credit, he got up. He climbed his way to the phone that was hanging on the wall, picked up the receiver, and laid back down. Accidentally, he dialed 411 at first. And so with his legs riddled with bullets, he had to get back up again and redial 911. And he did. And the paramedics eventually got to him, but they had to wait outside for the police to come and secure the scene. And as they were waiting, he was talking to the EMT, a frustrated EMT, who was just trying to get my dad to hang on long enough so the paramedics could come in and save his life. But my dad did not believe that he was going to be living much longer, and so he pled with the man on the phone to call my mom and to tell her that he loved her, and to also give a message to his sons, myself and my brothers, that he loved us too and that we should be good. That was his last message to us. Or it was what he thought it was his last message. As it turned out, my father did live that night. The paramedics were able to save his life. They brought him to the hospital. He was in very bad shape, and he was in the ICU for a week. But 3 weeks after the shooting, he did come home. He could only get around in a wheelchair at first, and then eventually a walker. And then by the end of the year, he was running and playing with us. And the thing that sticks out the most to me about my dad and about how he dealt with that trauma was that he never really was traumatized from it at all, nor did he harbor any bitterness or ill feelings. He had this joke that he would tell. He would talk about the guys that did it, the guys who shot him, and how he just wanted 5 minutes alone in a room with them. Just 5 minutes alone. And it was like a joke he would tell. I knew my dad would never do anything. He never spoke of them otherwise. It didn't change his outlook. It didn't change who he was. It didn't change his willingness to help and to serve others. He was a guy who knew that bad things happened in this world, and then he moved on and tried to learn what he could from them. 8 years later, I get a phone call from my grandfather. I'm serving as a missionary at this time. I'm in Arizona. I haven't seen my dad in 10 months. I get a phone call from my grandpa, and he tells me that it's happened again. 2 men burst into the store that was right here and shot my father. And I knew immediately he was dead. In a way that I didn't know when I was younger. When I was younger, I believed that he would live. But I knew instantly when Grandpa told me that Dad had been shot that was it for him. But I kept hope anyway. And I prayed over the next hour. And to be honest with you, they were pretty faithless prayers. I didn't think that they were going to do any good, but I didn't know what else to do. And gosh, this is hard to do this in front of this. Then my mom called me, and she told me that Dad had died. And I hung up the phone, and I went into my room, and I took off my tie, and I hung it on the rack, and I looked down at my feet, and I squared them up with the closet. I remember that specifically doing that action. And I think it was just a sense of wanting to do something that I had some control over. Wanting to do something that was precise and right. And in that moment, squaring up my feet was that thing, just making them square and perpendicular to the closet. And then I started thinking about the men who had done this, who had killed him. I didn't know them. I didn't know their names. I didn't know their faces. But I started thinking about them, and I got so angry. I was so mad at them because there were two men that did this. There was somebody responsible. God didn't do this. Two men did it. God allowed it to happen. Why, I didn't know. But two men had done it. And in that moment, I felt so angry at them. Such frustration. And then, almost immediately, the feeling left. It was gone. Completely. And it was replaced by a peace. A peace that my father was okay. I knew who he was. I knew he was a faithful man. I was pretty confident about where he was. But my thoughts turned again to those men. And I thought about what they had done. And I realized that there was a greater tragedy that had happened that night besides the death of my father. And the greater tragedy was what those two men had done to themselves. Physical death is one thing, but the spiritual death that takes place when somebody sins, and a sin of the magnitude that they committed that night, that is the kind of pain that is far greater than any physical pain that we can possibly encounter. I doubt very much that those men realized that night the magnitude of what they had done, or the loss that they had experienced in their soul. But the thing that I did know was that one day they would understand that. One day they would know what they had done, whether in this life or the next. They would be confronted with what they had done. And that would be a very bitter day indeed. And in thinking about that, my anger was replaced with empathy, with sympathy, and even with love. In that moment, I loved the men who killed my father. And I don't say that flippantly. It was a very real thing, and it was so real that it hasn't stopped. I have never, since that night, felt a moment of bitterness or anger. I was blessed with a perspective on what happened that night that has remained with me ever since. And the thing is that I wouldn't have that understanding. I wouldn't have seen that light. God's light shined so bright that night, and it has continued to shine brighter in my life ever since that night. Brighter than it ever did before. And that wouldn't have happened without passing through that kind of darkness. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't take my father back in an instant if that were possible and erase that whole thing. But I can't deny the benefit that it was to me and the way that it has helped me and changed me as a person and made me into so much of what I am now. I'm still growing, but I know that I am so much more than I would have been because of what I passed through and what my family passed through that night. That's why I'm making this film. Those are the stories I want to tell. We are having a very real experience here on earth. We are passing through trial. There is fire in the foothills. The world is on fire. And the world is also good and great and wonderful. Suffering is awful and terrible, but it is also a glorious thing. And the reason that I am making this film is because I want to talk about that directly. If you've seen the short film, then you know a little bit, but you don't know the half of what we're doing with this thing. Kevin's journey, the story of the shift, is about a man passing through incredible, unbelievable, oppressing darkness. But we're going to tell it in a way. We're going to tell that story in a way that is going to bring light. If you think about the times in your life when you've experienced trial, maybe it's not like my story, but you've got your own story. You've passed through something that was difficult, that was hard, that you didn't want to be at all, and you were better for it. I believe that's an important message to bring to people, to show them that even in the worst suffering, even in the worst kind of difficulty, that God is still there. And if we are faithful, he will show us his light. When I come here, that's what I think of. I think of, yes, this is where my father died, but I also think of the greatest blessings that have ever come to me in my life, the greatest light and knowledge. It's the struggle that allows light and hope to be made manifest. And that's all I really wanted to say on this. Beyond the calls for investment and the money we need to make this film and how we're not going to be able to do it if we don't, I hope you understand that it's coming from a very real place. I believe that there's an important message to share with people, that there is a hope that can be had even in the darkest of times. If that is something that you think is important, if you think that that's something that needs to go out there and be shared with people, I hope you'll join us in telling this story and partnering with us. Thanks very much.